I counted their ships. That's it. That's the whole thing I did wrong. I want you to understand that before anything else, because people have said a lot of words about me over the years, and most of them are too generous or too cruel, and almost none of them are accurate. I didn't order the war. I didn't fire a lance battery. I never touched a weapon in my life. I get a headache from the smell of coolant. I counted their ships. I wrote down the number, and the number was correct. 41. Everyone who was in that hall when I read it out is dead now. Every single one. The prefect, his aides, the flag officers with their ribbons hanging down to their knees, the little clerk from the 4th Bureau who kept clearing her throat. All gone. I'm the only one still breathing, and I think about that more than I think about food or sleep or my own name. So when the archive asked me to tell it, the whole thing, start to finish, out loud, no notes, I said yes. Not because it makes me feel better. It doesn't. I said yes because I want somebody someday to hear a man explain how a number can be perfectly true and still be the biggest lie ever told in this galaxy. My name is Ian Havitcore, 3rd grade verifier, Imperial Registry of Assay, Oceanic Imperium. You've probably never heard of my job. Nobody had. That was sort of the point. The Imperium ran on the registry. Not on the fleets, not on the throne, not on all that gold thread ceremony you see in the recordings. Those were the muscles. The registry was the spine. Every species that came into contact with us got weighed. Not weighed like on a scale, weighed like in a ledger. Every hull they owned, every gram of fissile, every shipyard slip, every grain of orbital tonnage, all of it got a number. And the number decided everything. Where you sat at a table, whether you got to speak first or last, whether your grievances went to a court or to a waste bin, whether we traded with you or simply took what we wanted and left you a receipt. It sounds cold when I say it now. At the time it felt like the opposite of cold. It felt like fairness. That's the trap, you understand. We weren't a cruel people, not the way the stories tell it. We were an orderly people, and we had confused the two so thoroughly that we couldn't tell them apart anymore. I loved it. I want to be honest about that too. I loved the work. I loved a clean column. There's a sound a well-kept ledger makes when you close it, this soft, dry clap, like a hand meeting a hand, and I'd chase that sound for 11 hours a day and go home happy. My office was on Seth Anver. You've seen pictures. Big gray ring station out past the Amoth Reach, 40 kilometers across, spinning slow enough that you could watch the stars crawl past the windows if you had nothing better to do. It smelled like heated stone and old paper. We still used paper for the final seals, if you can believe it, some tradition about a hand having to move for a thing to be true. I had a window, small one, took me 19 years to earn it. And I had Nessa. Nessa Dunferro was my junior verifier. 26 standard, bad posture, terrible at ceremony, brilliant at columns. She used to eat these dried root chips at her desk, and the crunching drove me insane, and I never once told her to stop, because she'd find things in a manifest that I'd walked past 4 times. She had a habit. When something bothered her, she'd tap the edge of her stylus against her teeth. Tap, tap, tap. You'd hear it across the room, and you'd know, before she said a word, that somebody's paperwork was about to have a bad afternoon. I'm telling you about her now because I need you to know her before the rest of it happens. That's not a storytelling trick. That's just what I owe her. So humanity. They came into our space the way most species do, quietly, awkwardly, in a leased hauler with a bad transponder. This was about 30 years before the war. A survey ship out of somewhere called Kuru, crewed by 9 people, one of whom had brought a guitar. I wasn't there. I read the intake report. There's a line in it I still remember. Crew appeared unarmed. Crew appeared confused. Crew offered the boarding party food. The boarding party declined. Obviously, you don't eat off-registry protein. They were assessed at the standard interval. Registry team went out to Saul, did the walkthrough, counted everything. And here's the thing, they weren't hiding anything. That's what everybody gets wrong when they tell this story. Humans didn't hide the fleet. There was no fleet. In that year, on that day, the number was accurate. They had a handful of orbital yards. They had some real ugly system defense platforms that looked like somebody had welded a dockyard to a grudge. They had a merchant marine that was frankly impressive for a species that young, and a war fleet of, I'm going from memory here, 19 hulls, all of them small, all of them slow, most of them older than the crews flying them. 19, 30 years before the war. 41 on the day. I read the number out loud. Do you understand what that told us? That told us they'd added 22 combat hulls in 3 decades. That's not a rise. That's not even a species trying. That's a species that has decided collectively to stop. We had numbers for that. There's a curve, the assay curve. Every verifier learns it in their first year. That shows what a healthy species does with its tonnage over time. It goes up. Sharp at first, then it flattens, then it climbs again when they hit the weft and realize how big the dark is. Humanity's curve went up, and then it went flat, and then it stayed flat for 30 years. We had a name for a curve like that in the registry. We called it a death shelf. Species that flatten like that are done. They've turned inward. They're arguing about taxes and gods and who owns which rock. They stop building because building is expensive and nobody can agree on why. We'd seen it 40, 50 times. It always ends the same way. Somebody else builds instead. So when the registry looked at humanity, we didn't see a threat. We didn't even see a rival. We saw a species sitting on 9 or 10 of the richest systems in the reach, with a death shelf curve and a merchant fleet, and we thought, and I thought this personally, I signed this, those systems are going to belong to somebody. It may as well be somebody who can count. That's how it starts, not with hate, with arithmetic. The ceremony was on the 9th of Rithmar, Assay Day. Every 11 years the registry did a public revaluation. It was theater mostly. All the numbers were already in, all the rankings already set, but the Imperium loved a ritual, and so we'd fill the great hall of assay with delegations and read the tonnage out loud like it was scripture. I hated it. I'd been made reader that cycle, an honor, they told me. It meant standing on a stone platform in a stiff collar for 6 hours reading numbers to a room full of people who already knew them. My feet hurt for a week after. Let me set the room for you, because the room matters. The Great Hall was carved out of a single asteroid they'd towed in from the Amoth Reach 2 centuries earlier. Gray-green stone, veined with something that caught the light and threw it back milky, like an eye. Ceiling so high the air changed temperature on the way up. There was a permanent draft in there, and it made this low note, a sort of ooh under everything. And after an hour you stopped hearing it, and after 2 hours you started hearing it again, and it drove you slowly out of your mind. Delegations sat in tiers. The tiers were the whole message. Highest tonnage sat closest to the floor, in the deep seats with the cushions and the little tables for their water. Lowest tonnage sat up in the gallery, on stone, no rail, and you had to climb 90-some steps to get there, and the servitors didn't go up that far, so if you wanted water you did without. Everybody understood. Nobody said it out loud. It was very civilized. That day the hall was full. 61 delegations. The Waro sat low and smug with their 40,000 hulls. The Cendric Compact was 2 tiers up and furious about it. The Otavi had brought their whole choir for some reason. It smelled like 6 dozen species worth of ceremonial oil and heated stone, and underneath it faintly like a machine shop. And humanity had sent one woman. Her name was Myra Oyalaran. She came in late. Not rudely late, the doors were still open, but late enough that people turned. She was small, shorter than most of us by a head. Dark-skinned, hair going gray at the front, wearing a plain dark suit that had been pressed maybe once and then folded into a bag for 6 weeks. And her shoes squeaked. I want you to hold on to that because I've never been able to let go of it. That stone floor, that enormous holy room, 61 delegations, and this little woman walking the whole length of it going squeak, squeak, squeak. Somebody laughed, up in the Cendric tier. One short bark of a laugh and then it caught, the way laughter does, and by the time she reached the floor a good third of the hall had it. She stopped, looked up at the tiers, and I swear this, she lifted one foot, looked at the sole of her shoe, made a face like yeah, I know, and put it down and kept walking. The laugh changed, got a little confused, died out. I was watching from the platform and I remember thinking, very clearly, that was well done. And then I thought nothing more about it for 3 years. She had a folder under her arm, brown cardboard tied with a string, and she had one aide with her, an older man, huge shoulders, silver beard, who moved like his knees hurt. He carried nothing at all. Her title on the roll I was reading from was Deputy of Accounts, Terran Directorate. Not ambassador, not admiral, not envoy plenipotentiary of the sovereign whatever, Deputy of Accounts. We thought that was an insult. A species had been called before the registry of assay, and they'd sent a bookkeeper. I've had 30 years to think about it, and I'll tell you what I think now. It wasn't an insult. It was a courtesy. She was the one who understood us best, so they sent her. They sent the person who'd know what we were actually doing. We just weren't equipped to recognize a courtesy that didn't look like one. Prefect Ulvin Tarosesh presided. I need to be careful here because it would be easy to make him a monster, and he wasn't. He was worse than a monster. He was pleasant. Tall, even for an Asen. Beautiful voice. That low, dry, amused voice that made everything sound like a joke you were already in on. He'd been prefect for 19 years, and in that time he'd expanded the registry's authority twice and never raised his voice once. People liked him. I liked him. He remembered the names of your children. He looked down at Myra Oyalaran, standing on the floor of the hall with her cardboard folder, and he did the thing that started the war. He gestured to a servitor, and a chair was brought out for her. A child's chair. Not a joke chair, not a prop, an actual chair from the creche levels, the kind they use for Asen younglings, low and small and padded, with a little scooped back. 2 servitors carried it out onto the stone and set it down in front of the delegate's mark, and the sound it made when it touched the floor was the smallest sound in the world. And Ulvin said, and I'm quoting, "This is in the record, the whole galaxy has heard it since," he said. "Forgive us, Deputy, our furnishings are made for larger accounts." The hall came apart. I have never heard a sound like that, and I hope I never do again. 61 species, 6,000 people, laughing in 6,000 different ways. The Waro drum their chests. The Otavi keen. The Cendric make this wet clicking. And it all went up into that high cold ceiling and came back down mixed together into one noise, and the noise had no words in it, and it went on and on. I laughed. I want that in the record too, not a big laugh. I wasn't a cruel man, I told you that. But I was standing on the platform with the ledger open in my hands and the number in front of my eyes, and I thought it was funny. Because the number was funny. Because 41 ships was funny. And I let out a little breath of a laugh, and then I straightened my collar and went back to being professional. That's my whole crime, one breath. She stood there and took it. Didn't sit in the chair. Didn't refuse it either, didn't push it away or make a speech. She just stood next to it, hands folded on her folder, and waited. Her face did almost nothing. Little bit of the mouth. Patience mostly. The look of somebody standing in a queue that isn't moving. And her aide, the big silver-bearded one. He stood behind her with his hands behind his back, and he looked up. Not at Ulvin. At the ceiling. At the great ribbed vault of the hall, this thing that took 40 years and 11,000 workers to carve. He looked at it the way you look at a building you might have to price one day. Nobody noticed. I only noticed because I was on the platform and I had nothing to do but read numbers and watch faces. Then it was my turn. Terran Directorate, I read. Systems held 11, orbital yards 16, merchant tonnage, significant C appendix, combat hulls registered in service. And here I paused, not for drama. My throat was dry, 6 hours in a stiff collar, that's all. 41. That did it again. The laughter, the second wave, and this one had teeth in it, because the first one had been about a chair and this one was about the number. This one was the whole hall telling a species to its face that it did not matter. Ulvin let it run. He was good at that. He never talked over a room. When it faded, he leaned forward, hands loose, and he asked the question in that warm, amused voice. Deputy, is the verifier's figure accurate? And she looked up at him. First time she'd looked at him directly the whole session. Yes, she said. Just that, yes. And Ulvin smiled and spread his hands to the hall. Like there, you see, no malice, we simply asked. But she wasn't done. She untied the string on that cardboard folder, took her a second, the knot was tight, and she took out a single sheet of paper, actual paper, and she held it up, and it was so small in that enormous room that it might as well have been a moth. It's accurate, she said. It's been accurate for 30 years. Your teams have counted us 11 times. Every count came back the same. She turned the paper around, though nobody could read it from where they sat. I brought your own figures. I thought you might want to check them against mine. Ulvin was still smiling. And do they agree? To the hull, she said. Then we have no dispute. No, she said, you don't. And she folded the paper in half, and put it back in the folder, and tied the string. That's it, that's all she said in the great hall of assay. 31 words if you're counting, and believe me, I've counted. The thing is, and I didn't hear this at the time, nobody did, we were all still enjoying ourselves, she said you. Not we. You have no dispute, you don't. She wasn't agreeing with him. She was letting him keep his number. Afterward in the reception hall, I met her. That wasn't planned. The registry does a receiving line after assay day, a pure formality. Delegations shuffle past and mumble at each other and eat little cold things off trays. I was in the line because readers are in the line. My feet were killing me. She came up the line and stopped in front of me, looked at my collar tabs. You're the one who read the number, she said. I am Yin Havitcore 3rd grade verifier. I did the bow, correct depth for the tonnage tier. I was very good at the bow. Myra, she said, and stuck her hand out. I didn't know what to do with it. Nobody had briefed me. I looked at it, this small brown hand, palm sideways, hanging in the air between us. And after a second she took it back without any fuss at all and put it in her pocket. Sorry, she said, force of habit. It's a greeting. It's a greeting. What does it mean? She thought about that. Actually thought, didn't just fire back an answer, which I noticed, because nobody in that building ever thought before answering. Originally, it meant look, no weapon, she shrugged. Now it doesn't mean anything, now it's just what you do. I said, ceremony. Ceremony, she agreed. And then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a paper twist and unwrapped it and held it out. And there were these little amber candies in it, dusty with sugar. Boiled sweet, she said. I stared at her. Deputy of a species with 41 warships was offering off-registry confectionery to a verifier of the Imperial Registry of Assay in the receiving line on assay day. I can't, I said. It's not certified. Ah, she popped one in her own mouth, clicked it against her teeth. Suit yourself. It's just sugar and lemon. My mother made these. Then she looked past me, at the wall behind the line, at the great tonnage board, the big illuminated thing that shows every species number in glowing rank order, top to bottom, the whole hierarchy of the known galaxy in one panel. She looked at it for a long moment. That's a lot of numbers, she said. It's every number, I said. I was proud. I'd helped build the schema. She rolled the sweet from one cheek to the other. Must be nice. I'm sorry. Knowing everything, she said, must be restful. And she moved down the line. I stood there feeling like I'd lost an argument I hadn't been having. And then somebody offered me a tray of cold things, and I forgot about it for 3 years. I need to tell you about the salvage lots now, and I need to tell you carefully, because this is the part where I could have stopped it and didn't. Under Imperial Law Registry Code, Title 9, decommissioned hulls have to be disposed of through licensed brokers. You can't just leave a dead warship floating. It's a navigation hazard, and more importantly, it's unaccounted tonnage. And unaccounted tonnage was the closest thing my people had to a sin. So when a ship dies, it goes to a lot. There were 7 great salvage yards in the Reach. Enormous places. Kilometers of dead hulls tethered in rows like fish on a line, spinning slow, going dark and colder every year. And here's what you have to understand about them. They were ours. Every hull in every lot was an Imperial hull, or an Allied hull, or a hull we'd taken off somebody who lost. We built them. We killed them. We knew every rivet. Humans started buying them about 28 years before the war. Legally, openly, through licensed brokers with the paperwork filed correctly and the fees paid on time. They bought scrap. Dead cruisers, gutted frigates, hulls with the drives pulled and the spines cracked. The kind of thing you buy for the alloy. And I signed off on it. Hundreds of times. That was literally my job, 3rd grade verifier, salvage and decommission. I'd get the lot manifest, I'd check the hull numbers against the death registry, I'd confirm the buyer's license, I'd stamp it, and it would go into the ledger under Class D, non-combatant salvage. Class D 0 tonnage doesn't count. Do you see it yet? I didn't. For 28 years I didn't. They weren't hiding a fleet from us. They were buying one from us, and we were writing them the receipts. Nessa found it first. This was 3 years after Assay Day, maybe a little less. The war had started by then, I'll get to that, but it was going well, which is the important part. It was going so well that nobody was looking at paperwork. She came into my office late. Second shift, lights down, everyone gone. She had a slate in one hand and she was tapping her stylus against her teeth. Tap, tap, tap. Ian, she said, I've got a ship that moved. Moved where? That's the thing, nowhere. It moved and it's still in the same place. I made her sit down and explain it twice. Here's what she had. Lot 14, Amoth Reach. Long row of dead hulls, human-owned, bought about 19 years back. All Class D, all stamped, all mine, my seal on every one I checked. And one of them, hull registry OSS 4471, formerly the heavy cruiser Patient Reckoning, had shifted position by 400 meters between 2 survey passes 11 years apart. Drift, I said, tether slack micrometeor. That's what I said, tap, 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 so I pulled the whole lot. Yen, they all moved. Every hull in Lot 14, 400 meters near enough same direction. Then it's the lot that drifted, the whole anchor. The anchor didn't move. I remember the exact quality of the silence in my office after she said that. That low station hum, the draft going ooh in the vent. Show me the anchor readings, I said. She showed me. Anchor was solid. Hadn't moved a centimeter in 11 years. But 9,000-odd dead hulls tethered to it had all shuffled 400 meters closer together like, I don't know how to say this, like they'd been squared up. Like somebody had come along and tidied the row. Alloy recovery, I said. They're stripping them. Removing mass changes the tether tension. Everything settles. Nessa looked at me. She had this way of looking at you where she didn't argue. She just waited to see if you'd finish being wrong on your own. 19 years, she said. They've owned that lot 19 years. Ian, where's the alloy? If they're stripping them, there's a smelter somewhere with 9,000 cruisers worth of hull plate in it. Show me the smelter. Show me one manifest. One barge, one invoice. I didn't have one. They're slow, I said. They bought 140 lots. That number, that's the one that should have ended it, right there in my office at second shift, 3 years into a war we were winning. 140 salvage lots, roughly 9,000 hulls apiece, some more, some less. Purchased over 28 years. Legally, through licensed brokers, filed correctly, fees paid on time, stamped Class D by me and about 60 other verifiers just like me across the whole registry. That's over 1 million dead hulls. And here's the thing I want you to sit with, we knew that. It was in the ledger. It was public. Anybody could pull it. Humanity's salvage holdings were the largest in the Imperium by a factor of 30, and it wasn't a secret. It wasn't buried. It was in the front of the book, because Class D is at the front of the book, because Class D doesn't matter, because Class D is 0. The greatest deception in the history of this galaxy was filed correctly and available on request. I told Nessa to write it up. I want to be clear, I didn't bury it. I'm not going to stand here and let you think I buried it, because that would be easier than what I actually did. I told her to write it up, and then I read what she wrote, and I flagged it grade 3 anomalous, non-urgent, and I sent it up the chain. Grade 3 goes into a queue. The queue was, at that time, about 14 months deep. Why did I do it? I've had 30 years and I've got a real answer, and I'm not going to dress it up. Because we were winning. Because it was a drift anomaly in a scrapyard during the greatest military triumph in 9 centuries, and if I'd flagged it grade 1, I'd have had to walk into a room full of admirals with their ribbons down to their knees and say, "Excuse me, sirs, I think the garbage is arranged strangely." And they would have laughed. The same laugh, exactly the same laugh as the chair. I'd heard that laugh once and I joined in, and it had felt good, and I never wanted to be on the other end of it. That's it. That's the reason. A whole civilization ended because a middle-aged clerk didn't want to be laughed at. Nessa didn't say anything when I flagged it. She just took her slate back and looked at it for a second and then said, "Okay, Yen," and went back to her desk. She never brought it up again, not once. She was that kind of person. The war. I've been putting it off. Let me do it quickly, because honestly there isn't much to tell, which was the whole problem. We didn't declare it over the chair. That's the popular version and it's wrong. The chair was the 9th of Rithmar. The war started 14 months later, over the Kethris Passage, a weft corridor running through 3 human systems that the registry had reclassified as an imperial thoroughfare. Reclassified, not seized. We reclassified it, changed a category in a book, and by changing the category we made it ours, and when human traffic kept using it as though nothing had changed, we impounded a hauler. They asked for arbitration. We offered arbitration at the tonnage tier appropriate to their assay, which meant they'd be heard in the 9th session, in about 6 years, in a gallery with no water. They asked again. We repeated ourselves. And then they stopped asking, and their directorate sent one short signal, and the signal said, "We consider the passage ours. We will keep using it. Do what you think is right." Do what you think is right. We spent 2 weeks in the registry arguing about whether that was a threat. Concluded it wasn't. Concluded it was resignation. Concluded, in fact, and I helped draft this, that it was a species asking to be relieved of a burden it could no longer carry. I wrote that sentence, me, 3rd grade verifier Ian Havitcore. I was proud of it. I thought it was elegant. So the Imperium moved into the Kethris Passage with 900 hulls, and humanity met us with 11, and we broke them in 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Understand, that's not a battle, that's a demolition. Their ships were exactly what the assay said they were, old, slow, undergunned. They fought beautifully and it made no difference at all. 11 hulls died and took 2 of ours with them, which the fleet found charming, in the way you find it charming when a small animal bites you. Then we took the passage. Then we took the 3 systems around it. Then, because there was nothing stopping us, we took 4 more. 2 years. We took 31 human worlds in 2 years, and the total Imperial hull loss for the entire campaign was 19 ships. 19. I did that reconciliation myself. 19 against 31 worlds. And here's what nobody talks about, so I will. They evacuated. Every world, every single one. We'd come in expecting a siege and we'd find cities standing, lights on, water running, and nobody in them. No sabotage, no scorched earth. They didn't even break the machines. They just left. Took the people out and left us the real estate, neat and tidy, like a tenant returning a key. The fleet called it cowardice. The registry called it asset abandonment consistent with terminal decline. I remember the phrase because I helped write that too. Nessa said in my office over her root chips, "Where'd they go?" "Interior systems," I said. "That's 400 million people in 2 years. Where are the ships?" "Because you can't move 400 million people without hulls. I ran it later, when it didn't matter. You need something on the order of 900,000 large transports doing continuous runs for 24 months. Humanity had 41 warships and a merchant marine of, generously, 60,000. Somebody moved 400 million people across a war zone in 2 years, using ships that did not exist in any ledger in the Imperium. We noticed. I want to be honest, we noticed. It came up. It was discussed. And the registry's finding, formally entered, was that human population figures had been self-reported and were likely inflated for prestige purposes, and that the true population was probably a fraction of the claim. We decided they'd been lying about how many of them there were. Because the alternative was arithmetic, we didn't want to do. I was aboard the Grand Assay at the Amoth Reach. Not by choice. Flagships carry a registry detachment. Somebody has to inventory the prizes, count the tonnage taken, make it official. Otherwise a victory doesn't exist, you see. It has to be written down. That was my job, and I'd done it at 4 of the 31 worlds, and I was very tired of shipboard food. The Reach was the last stop. Everybody knew it. Past the Reach there was one more weft corridor and then Sol, and Sol was the end of the war, and everybody aboard was already thinking about the parade. There was a mood on that ship. I've never been able to describe it to anyone who wasn't there. Not bloodthirst, nothing so honest. It was jolly. Officers making bets on the surrender date. Somebody had drawn a little cartoon of a chair and pinned it in the wardroom, and people would tap it as they walked past for luck. There was a rumor that Ulvin himself was going to come out for the final signature, and there was genuine excitement about that, like a holiday. And the Amoth Reach itself. Have you seen it? Probably not from inside. It's a debris field, a real one, the corpse of a planet that came apart maybe 2 billion years ago, spread out over a volume you could lose a small empire in. Rock and iron and ice, all of it turning, all of it dark. It's the reason Seth Anver was built where it was. You can hide a repair yard in there. You can hide anything in there, and we had. And running through it in long, neat rows, tethered to anchors we'd sunk ourselves, were the salvage lots. I looked at them out the observation port about 6 hours before it happened. I remember it perfectly. The Grand Assay was doing a slow transit past Lot 14, the same lot, Nessa's lot, 400 meters of tidiness, and I stood at the port with a cup of something hot and looked at 9,000 dead ships. They were beautiful in a way, all lined up, nose to tail, cold and dark and dusted gray-brown with 2 decades of debris haze, so they didn't even shine anymore, they just sort of absorbed. Big ones. Old Reckoning class and Vessing class hulls I'd read about in school, the ones that took the Cendric compact apart at Hollow Grieve. We'd killed them all ourselves, every one. There was a junior lieutenant at the port with me, barely out of the academy. He said, and I want to strangle him, and I want to strangle myself because I agreed, he said. Sad, isn't it, sir? Great ships like that, and now they belong to the monkeys. That word, that's what the fleet called them by then. Somebody had gotten hold of a Terran nature record and it had spread. They belong to the ledger, I said, very smug, very registry, Class D. Class D, he agreed and laughed and went to get his supper. He died about 7 hours later. His name was Fen Or Alsesh. He was 19. He had a sister on Seth Anver. It started with the tethers. Every lot has a tether telemetry feed. Nobody watches it. It's a nothing feed, tension, readings, thermal, drift. It goes into a registry buffer and sits there for 11 years and gets purged. At 341 shipboard, every tether in Lot 14 released simultaneously. Not broke released. Clean disengage, the way they're designed to when a broker comes to collect. 9,000 hulls, one command, one instant. The alarm that generates is not a combat alarm. It's an administrative alarm. It sounds like a soft double chime, and it appears on a registry console, my console, and it means unaccounted tonnage in transit. I was asleep. My assistant woke me, not because it was urgent, because it was odd and I'd trained her to flag odd things, which is funny, isn't it? That's the only thing I ever did right, and it bought me 40 seconds. I got to the console in my sleep robe. I remember the cold of the deck through my slippers. I looked at the screen and it said, in the calm gray text of the registry standard interface, Lot 14, tether disengage, 9,114 units, Class D, and ON combatant contact broker 4 manifest. And I said out loud alone in a room in my slippers, that's not right. And then Lot 22 released, and Lot 9, and Lot 60, and then the console couldn't keep up and it stopped listing them individually and just started showing a running total, and the total was climbing so fast that the digits blurred, and I stood there and watched a number go up. I'd spent my whole life reading numbers out loud. I couldn't read that one. My mouth wouldn't do it. Then they lit their drives. I've heard a lot of people describe this over the years, and everybody reaches for something big, dawn, gods, judgment, whatever. I'm going to tell you what it was actually like, from a registry console on the Grand Assay, and I want you to have the small version, because the small version is worse. The reach went from black to gray. That's all, that's it. Not a flash. Not a wall of fire. The debris field, this vast dark nothing that had been dark for 2 billion years, turned the color of dirty ice, all at once, everywhere, out to the limit of the sensors and past it. Because 1 million and a bit fusion drives had come up to idle, not full burn, idle. And the light off them hit the dust, and the dust glowed, and suddenly you could see the shape of the reach for the first time in the history of my species. You could see how big it was. All that rock and ice, lit from inside by ships we had built and killed and sold. And every hull in every lot was facing the same way. 400 meters of drift over 11 years. 9,000 hulls squaring up. 140 lots of them. Somebody had spent 2 decades nudging 1 million ships into a firing line 400 meters at a time, so slowly that it read as drift. So slowly that it went into the buffer and got purged, so slowly that when a brilliant young verifier with bad posture caught it, her supervisor flagged it grade 3 because he was afraid of being laughed at. The bridge went insane. I could hear it through the deck. Alarms, real ones now, combat alarms, that awful rising tone. And under it on my console the registry interface kept doing its job. Calm gray text, updating. Class D and ON combatant. Class D and ON combatant. Class D and ON combatant. Over and over, 1 million times, as the fleet that ended us came off the tethers. The ledger never lied to me. Not once. Not for a second. It told me exactly what was happening in the only language I'd ever taught it. Here's what they'd done. I've had 30 years and access to the depositions, and I can tell it to you straight now. They never built a fleet. Building a fleet is loud. Yards are visible, alloy flows show up, Crews have to be trained, and trained crews talk. Every species that ever tried to outbuild us got counted while they did it, and then we came and took the yards. So humanity didn't build, they bought. They bought our dead. Legally, patiently, 28 years through licensed brokers at scrap rates, filed correctly, fees paid on time. And then they towed them out to the lots where scrap goes, where nobody looks, because looking at scrap is my job and my job is zero, and they fixed them. Not restored. Nobody restored anything. That would have been detected. Half those hulls had no crew accommodation left in them at all. The humans didn't rebuild it, they just didn't need it. They put in a spine, a drive, a reactor, and a gun. That's it. 1,000,000 ships with no galley, no infirmary, no bunks, some with no bridge. You could run one on 4 people, and a lot of them ran on none. And this is the part that made my flag officers physically ill when they learned it. A lot of them were empty. The patient reckoning the hull Nessa found, hull OSS 4471, one of the great cruisers of my people's history. When we boarded her after, there were 2 humans aboard. 2. A woman of 60 and her nephew. They'd been living in a pressurized module bolted into the old missile bay for 9 years, growing beans, and they had a dog. 9 years in a scrapyard, growing beans, waiting. And the reason it worked, I want to be so clear about this. The reason it worked is not that humans were clever. It's that we had told them publicly in our own law, in a book anybody could read, exactly what we would not look at. Class D noncombatant, salvage 0. They didn't break the rule. They didn't bend it. They obeyed it, harder and longer and more patiently than anyone in the history of the Imperium, and they let it hollow us out from the inside. 41 ships. That number was true. It was true the whole time. Because a hull only counts as a warship when it's registered as a warship, and the humans registered 41, exactly 41, and paid the fees on everyone and never once filed a false document. They didn't lie to us. We lied to ourselves, and they simply didn't correct us. For 30 years. That was their entire strategy. That was the whole war. They let us keep our number. The Amoth Reach lasted 6 hours. I don't have a battle to give you. I wasn't a soldier, and I've never been able to follow the tactical reconstructions, all those arrows. I'll give you what I had, which was a window and a console and a headache. The first hour was disbelief. The fleet actually hailed them. Formal challenge 3 times by protocol, demanding registry and intent, because that's what you do, that's the form. 1,000,000 ships came off the tethers, and the Grand Assay asked them for their paperwork. They answered. That's the thing that gets me. They answered. One signal unencrypted on the registry channel, not the combat channel, the registry channel, my channel, the one that comes to my console, and it was a manifest. A proper one. Correct format. Every hull number, every buyer's license, every fee receipt. 1,000,000 lines. Perfectly filed. And at the bottom in the remarks field, the little box where a broker writes minor hull damage or engine absent, 1 line of text. It said reclassified. That's all, 1 word in a remarks box on a form. I laughed. I want to tell you that because it's true and because it's the worst thing I ever did. I stood in my sleep robe in front of a console with 1,000,000 warships waking up outside the hull, and I read that word, and I laughed, this awful cracked noise. Nothing like a laugh really, and the officer next to me looked at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. Because it was our word, reclassified. That's what we did to the Kethris passage. Changed a category in a book, and by changing the category made it ours. She'd been listening. In the receiving line with a boiled sweet in her cheek, looking at the tonnage board. Must be nice, knowing everything. Then the second hour started, and I stopped laughing forever. I'm not going to describe the killing at length. It isn't mine to make into a spectacle, but I saw some of it, and I'll tell you the parts I can't put down. They didn't maneuver. That's what broke us tactically, if you want the honest analysis. Every doctrine my people had was built on hulls being precious. You screen your capitals. You break off when you're hurt. You bring your wounded home because a hull is 19 years and a shipyard slip. The human hulls weren't precious. They were garbage, free garbage that we had sold them at scrap rates. So they came straight in. No screen, no reserve, no withdrawal. A wall of dead ships with one gun each, walking into our Lance batteries at a constant closing rate. And every time we killed one, there were 400 behind it. And the killing didn't slow them by a single second, because nobody was aboard most of them. We were firing at empty ships. We burned our whole magazine capacity in 90 minutes on hulls that had nobody in them. And then we had nothing left, and they were still coming. And then the crude ones came in behind. I saw the Vessen's Grace die. Great old ship, 300 years, 60,000 crew. She took 4 hulls into her flank in 11 seconds and came apart along the spine, and I watched a light go through her from front to back like something swallowing. And the 4 hulls that did it, I looked them up after, because of course I did. Because I'm me, were the Ottermill, the Hardgrave, the 66, and one that had no name at all. Just the number we'd given it when we killed it 400 years ago at Hollow Grieve. We beat the Cendric Compact with that hull, and then we sold it for its alloy, and then it killed 60,000 of us. There's an accounting in that. I've never been able to close it. The Grand Assay died at 9:47. I don't remember the hit. I remember being on a deck that was suddenly the wall, and I remember the smell, coolant, which I always hated, which gives me a headache, and I remember thinking that's coolant. I have a headache while a corridor came apart 40 meters away. I got to a pod because a rating I'd never met put me in one. Big fellow, burned down one side of his face, and he was loading pods by hand because the automation was gone, and he took me by the collar, by my registry collar, the stiff one, 19 years to earn, and he threw me into a pod like a sack of post and slapped the plate, and that was that. I never learned his name. I've tried. The crew list didn't survive. I want to say something about that, and I don't know how to make it not sound stupid. He didn't know me. He had 4 seconds and a pod, and he used them on a middle-aged clerk in a sleep robe who had personally, with his own seal, certified as worthless every single ship that was killing him. I've never understood it. I've never stopped trying. Nessa wasn't aboard. She was on Seth Anver, at her desk, and Seth Anver was gone by the second day. Not attacked, cut off. The humans didn't fire on it. They took the Reach, and the Reach was every corridor in and out, and 40,000 people on a station with a 90-day cycle went from the center of the Imperium to a jar. They surrendered on the 11th day, and the humans came and took them off and fed them, and every single one of them lived. Everyone. Except that Nessa had been in the registry corps when the station's outer ring took a debris strike from something that was not a weapon, just a rock, just the Reach being the Reach, and 11 people died, and she was one of them, and there is no meaning in it at all. She was 29, she'd found it. She'd found the whole thing in a drift anomaly at second shift, tapping her stylus against her teeth. She was right, and she was polite about being right, and she said okay, Ian, and went back to her desk, and then she died in a rock strike during a war she'd tried to stop. That's the part I can't dress up for you. There's no shape to it. It's just what happened. It ended 14 weeks later. Not with a battle. The Imperium had 200,000 hulls, and they were spread across 900 systems doing occupation duty on 31 empty human worlds, and the humans didn't come for them. They took the weft corridors, all of them everywhere, in 14 weeks, and then they just stopped and stood there. They didn't invade the Oceanic homeworld. They never fired on a population center. Not once. The entire war, you can check. It's been checked 1,000 times by people who badly wanted it not to be true. They took the corridors and then they waited, and 200,000 Imperial warships sat in systems they couldn't leave, and the food ran out on schedule, because We were an orderly people and our supply chains were beautifully documented. The throne surrendered on the 9th of Rithmar, Assay Day. I don't think that was an accident, but I've never found anyone who'd admit it. They held the signing in the Great Hall of Assay. I was there, I don't fully know why. I was a third-grade verifier, I had no standing, and by then there were maybe 4 people left alive who could operate the registry, and I suppose I was the least dead of them. They gave me a chair in the second tier and a clean collar, and I sat there with my hands in my lap and looked at the floor where a chair had been put down once. The hall was almost empty. That's what I remember most. 61 delegations, 6,000 people, and now there were maybe 200, rattling around in that enormous carved room with the draft going ooh in the vents. Ulvan Tarosesh wasn't there. He'd died at the Reach, he'd come out for the parade, the way the rumor said, and he'd been aboard the Vessen's Grace. He got what he wanted in a way. He was there at the end of the war. And she came in. Same walk, same length of that enormous floor. Gray all through the front of her hair now, and she moved slower, and she was still wearing a plain dark suit that had been folded in a bag. The shoes still squeaked. Nobody laughed. 200 survivors of the greatest power in the galaxy sat in a stone room and listened to a small woman's shoes squeak the whole length of the floor, and not one person made a sound, and it took forever, and I have never in my life heard anything louder. She had the folder, same one, brown cardboard tied with a string. I could see the wear on the corners, 29 years that folder. And her aide came behind her. The big one, silver beard, older now, using a stick, but there. And he looked up at the ceiling again, at the great ribbed vault. 40 years and 11,000 workers. And this time I knew exactly what he was doing, and I understood that he had been doing it the first time too. They'd brought a chair out for her, full size. Good one, the deep-tier kind with the cushion and the little table for water. She didn't sit in it. She stood next to it, hands folded on the folder, exactly the way she had before, and waited to be addressed. That was when I broke. Not at the Reach, not in the pod, not when they told me about Nessa. Right there, in the second tier, in a clean collar, watching a woman decline to sit in a chair. Because she wasn't making a point. That's what got me. She was just standing. It was habit by then. She'd stood the last time and it hadn't hurt her any, so she stood again. That was all. We tried to humiliate her with a chair, and she'd taken the chair away from us, and she hadn't even meant to. The terms were 9 pages. 9. We'd expected 900. No reparations. No occupation. No disarmament clause, which caused a genuine argument on our side because our people didn't believe it and kept asking what the catch was. They took back their 11 systems. They took the Kethris passage, permanently, with a note, and the note said reclassified, and I have to believe someone enjoyed that. They took custody of the salvage lots, which was funny, because they already owned them, they'd paid for them, we had the receipts. And there was one more clause, Article 9. It's the only one anybody remembers. The Imperial Registry of Assay is dissolved. No successor body shall assign a rank, tier, seating precedence, or order of address to any species on the basis of tonnage, hulls, industrial output, or any measure of force. That's it. That's what they wanted. 29 years of patience and 1 million dead ships and 400 million people moved across a war zone in the dark, and what they took was the seating chart. I was in the room when the Throne's Council asked why. He was old and he was frightened, and he asked it honestly. Why this? Take our worlds, take our yards. Why the registry? And she said, and this is the only long thing she ever said in that hall, and I've got it word for word, because I've had 30 years. Because it works, she said. That's the problem, it's not a lie. Every number in that book is true. You count better than anyone I've ever met. She put her hand flat on the folder. And you built a machine that tells you exactly how much a stranger is worth before they open their mouth, and then you believed it. Not out of malice. You believed it because it was accurate. She looked around the hall, at the tiers, at the gallery 90 steps up where the servitors don't go. We could take your ships, she said. You'd build more. We could take your worlds, you'd want them back, and you'd be right to. But as long as that board is on that wall, somebody is going to walk into this room and be told what they're worth before they've said hello. And in 100 years, there'll be another chair. Nobody answered her. What do you say? Then she picked up the pen, a real pen on paper, because they insisted, because a hand has to move for a thing to be true. And I don't know if she knew that was our tradition, or if it's just what her people do, and she signed it, and the war was over. She found me afterward. I don't know how. 200 people in that hall, and she came up the line. There was still a line. We still did the line. We didn't know how to do anything else. And she stopped in front of me and looked at my collar tabs. You're the one who read the number, she said. I couldn't speak. I opened my mouth and nothing happened. She waited. She was good at waiting. That was the whole thing about her. That was the entire secret of her species as far as I can tell. They were good at waiting, and we thought that meant they'd stopped. It was accurate, I finally said. It came out in pieces. The number, it was, I checked it 11 times, it was accurate. I know, she said. I told you it was. Why didn't you? And I couldn't finish it, but she knew. Would you have believed me? And I thought about it. I actually thought about it properly, the way she'd thought about the handshake, and I want you to know that I was honest with her, because she'd been honest with me for 29 years, and it was the only thing I had left to give. No, I said. I'd have flagged at grade 3. Something moved across her face, not a smile, something more tired. Yeah, she said. And then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a paper twist and unwrapped it, and there were these little amber candies in it, dusty with sugar. Same pocket, same twist, near enough. Boiled sweet, she said. The registry was dissolved. There was no certification. There was no class, no tier, no schema. There was nothing anymore that could tell me whether it was safe. I took one. It was sugar and lemon. It stuck to my teeth. It was the best thing I've ever tasted, and I've never had another one, because her mother made them, and her mother was dead. And Myra Oyalaran died 9 years ago on a world I've never seen, and there aren't any more. She put the twist back in her pocket. Thank you, I said. And she stuck her hand out, palm sideways, hanging in the air between us. Look, no weapon. This time I knew what it was for. I'd read about it. I'd studied it. 19 years to earn a window and 30 seconds to lose an empire, and somewhere in between I had finally learned one single thing about somebody else. I took her hand. Her grip was terrible, bones like a bird, 41 warships in a folder made of cardboard. I'm the last one now. Everyone in that hall on the 9th of Rithmar, the first one, the chair one, every one of them is dead, and I'm not, and people ask me what I learned. I'll tell you what I learned. It isn't wise, it isn't a lesson, it's just the thing I know. I counted their ships, and the number was true, and I read it out loud in a holy room, and everybody laughed. And I laughed too, one breath, that's all. One small breath of a laugh, and 30 years later I'm still hearing it come down off that ceiling. We had the best ledger in the galaxy. Every figure correct. Every column clean. And it never once told us the only thing that mattered, because we never built a column for it, because you cannot weigh it, because there is no unit. You can count what a people has. You cannot count what they are willing to wait for.